Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at child labor in Guyana.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a tough topic,
It is a tough topic.
and we're going to be taking a look at it through this article we got from News Source Guyana.
Okay.
And it seems like Guyana's government is really trying to step up their efforts to combat child labor.
That's good.
Yeah, it seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
But there also seems to be some differing opinions on, what's actually happening on the ground and what solutions are actually going to work.
Right.
But before we jump into all of that, I'm kind of curious, when you hear the term child labor, like what comes to mind for you?
I mean, I think it's probably similar for a lot of people. Like you said, it evokes images of those sweatshops or, kids working in dangerous conditions.
Yeah, like dark factories and fields and stuff.
Exactly.
Mm.
But I think this deep dive will kind of add some layers to that picture for us. And we'll see that things are not always so black and white.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And speaking of layers, this article kind of kicks off with Guyana's Ministries of Labor and Human Services teaming up to tackle this problem.
Okay, yeah. So that sounds promising, right? Two government agencies coming together to try to address this.
Yeah, it does. And one thing that really stuck out to me was their emphasis on training officers to really engage with families in the community.
Yeah, it's like they're acknowledging that you can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach to this problem, right?
Right.
To truly help, you have to understand the nuances of each child's situation, each family's struggles, and kind of go from there.
Totally. And Minister Prasad even said that they need to examine the issue at a very deep level.
Right.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Minister Hamilton, who's also, part of the same government, believes that child labor cases have actually decreased in Guyana.
So is this just, two sides of the same coin? Or are they missing something crucial here?
Yeah, like what's going on? Are they even defining child labor the same way? Are they looking at the same data? Like if they can't agree on the size of the problem, how can they actually create solutions that are actually going to work?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, and, despite this, disconnect that we're seeing, both ministers seem to at least agree on the power of education.
Okay.
Minister Prasad is all about raising awareness in schools and communities, making sure people know this is an issue.
Yeah.
While Minister Hamilton wants to empower these kids with skills for legal work when they're older. So kind of looking at it from a long-term perspective.
Right. So it's kind of like a two-pronged approach there.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need for clear distinctions. Like Minister Prasad pointed out, we can't just lump a kid helping with chores into the same category as exploitative labor.
Right.
There's a world of difference between a child, contributing to their family and a child being robbed of their education and safety.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting to me.
Okay.
Minister Prasad talked about understanding the family's situation, while Minister Hamilton is pushing for these safe havens with training for vulnerable kids.
Oh, interesting.
So are they subtly connecting here?
I think they are. It's like they're both saying that to truly tackle child labor, you need kind of a two-pronged attack. You need to provide that immediate support for these kids and their families,
Right.
but also empower these kids for the future. So it's a much more holistic view of the problem.
I think so, too. And it seems like, Guyana, at least strategically, is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
But how are they actually going to pull this off? What about the laws? Are the laws strong enough to protect these kids? Can they actually enforce these laws?
Well, Minister Hamilton seems pretty confident in the laws that they have in place.
Okay.
He even mentioned a national action plan for eliminating child labor altogether.
Oh, wow.
So, they have the framework in place, but the real kicker here is he wants to see tangible results within a year.
Wow, he's not messing around.
It's accountability in action. He's basically saying, in a year, show me how these plans have improved the lives of children affected by this issue.
Yeah.
So it's pretty powerful.
So we've got this picture of Guyana, really taking on child labor head on.
Yeah.
But let's be real, this isn't just a Guyana problem. This is a global issue.
Oh, absolutely. And the causes are so tangled and complex. Poverty, forcing families into impossible choices, lack of education, and sometimes even cultural norms that have been around for generations.
Yeah, it's like a giant knot that no one can untangle.
Exactly, and it really makes you realize that there's no one magic wand solution here.
Right.
What works in Guyana might completely fail somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's where understanding the context is so important.
Absolutely.
You know, sometimes it's about providing economic support to families, sometimes it's about access to education, and sometimes it's even about challenging those deeply rooted cultural norms that we were talking about. And that brings us back to Guyana's approach, which seems to be this mix of, enforcement, addressing those root causes, and providing support.
Right. A much more holistic view.
It's ambitious, to say the least.
It is, and that's where the collaboration between those two ministries that we talked about earlier becomes so interesting.
Right.
They each bring a different perspective and different resources to the table, right?
Yeah.
And that creates this more well-rounded, comprehensive approach.
It's like they're weaving this safety net to try to catch kids before they fall through the cracks.
It is, and not just catching them, but giving them the tools to climb back up.
I like that.
Yeah, it highlights the importance of early intervention.
Yeah.
The sooner we address those factors that lead to child labor, the better chance we have at breaking that cycle of poverty and exploitation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one thing that really struck me about their approach was their focus on training those officers to actually engage with families and communities.
Yeah.
It's like a shift away from punishment and towards a more empathetic and collaborative approach.
It's recognizing that families often make these difficult choices out of desperation, not malice.
Right.
So by working with them, you can guide them toward alternatives that are actually going to protect their children's well-being.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about Minister Hamilton's challenge to see those tangible results within a year.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that shows a real dedication to making this a long-term effort.
It does. And that kind of accountability sends a really powerful message.
For sure.
This isn't just talk. It's about action and actually seeing that change happen.
Yeah, but, even with the best intentions, tackling child labor is a marathon, not a sprint.
Oh, for sure.
There are going to be hurdles along the way.
Absolutely. It's a deeply entrenched problem, and change takes time.
Mm-hmm.
But what gives me hope is that, more and more countries are recognizing the urgency of this issue and taking steps to address it.
Yeah, and I think Guyana's approach, with its emphasis on collaboration, that community engagement and those long-term solutions, I think it could be a really valuable model for other nations that are dealing with this.
It's a reminder that child labor isn't just a development issue, it's a human rights issue. Yeah. Every child deserves the chance to live a life free from exploitation and, to reach their full potential.
Well said. Now, before we go too far down this road, I think there's one part of this article that deserves a little bit of a closer look.
Okay.
And that's Guyana's National Action Plan for the Elimination of Child Labor.
Ah, yes. This is where those commitments turn into concrete actions.
Yeah.
These national action plans, they're vital. They lay out specific goals, strategies, and timelines for tackling child labor. It's their roadmap for change.
So it's not just like a vague promise. It's actually a detailed plan with measurable outcomes.
Exactly. It outlines the roles of different groups, government agencies, charities, even businesses.
Oh, wow.
All working together. And importantly, it often includes ways to track their progress.
This sounds incredibly thorough.
It is.
Like, what kind of actions are we talking about here? Can you give us a sneak peek?
Well, the article doesn't get into the specifics, but we can get some clues from what those ministers said earlier. For example, Minister Persaud's emphasis on public education suggests that the plan will likely include strategies to raise awareness about child labor in schools and communities.
Okay.
And you remember Minister Hamilton talking about giving vulnerable kids training and development opportunities?
Right.
That could be another key part of this plan, equipping them with the skills they need for future employment.
Right. So they're not just trying to stop child labor. They're trying to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Exactly. The plan probably tackles the issue from all angles. Prevention, protection, even rehabilitation.
Wow.
It's about recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
And different situations are going to need different approaches.
So it's kind of like this multi-layered attack on child labor, tackling both the immediate problem,
right,
but also the root causes.
Exactly. And these national action plans, they're not set in stone. They need to adapt to the changing realities on the ground.
So it's not just about setting goals and checking boxes. It's about constantly evaluating and refining those strategies to make sure that they're actually making a difference.
Absolutely. Monitoring and evaluation are crucial.
Yeah.
Tracking their progress and identifying those areas where things aren't working, they can course correct and make adjustments along the way.
So it's a very dynamic process.
It is.
Constantly striving to improve and make a real impact in the lives of these children.
Yeah.
Now, are these national action plans unique to Guyana? Or are other countries adopting this approach as well?
They're actually becoming much more common globally.
Oh, wow.
And for good reason. The International Labor Organization, or the ILO, they're a big advocate for these plans.
Okay.
They see them as a framework for combating child labor, and they even offer guidelines and resources to help countries develop and implement effective plans.
This is kind of like a globally recognized best practice,
Precisely.
backed by international organizations.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Yeah.
Child labor is a complex beast that needs a coordinated, multi-sector approach. These national action plans provide that framework to bring everyone together under that common goal.
Yeah, it's like a blueprint for collective action,
That's it.
making sure everyone's on the same page
Right.
and working toward the same objectives.
And by adopting this common framework, countries can learn from each other,
Oh, that's cool.
share best practices, and even collaborate on regional and international initiatives.
It reminds us that this isn't just a national problem. It's a global challenge that needs global solutions.
Exactly, and that's why these national action plans are so crucial. They represent a commitment to action,
Yeah.
a pledge to protect the rights of children and ensure their well-being.
It's like a beacon of hope, lighting the path towards a world where every child can live a life free from exploitation.
I like that.
And full of opportunity. But let's get real for a second.
Okay.
Tackling child labor isn't just about government policies and fancy action plans.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we think and act as a society.
You're absolutely right. It's about changing mindsets, challenging norms that have been around for far too long.
Yeah.
We sometimes forget that child labor was once commonplace even in developed countries.
Really?
It took decades of advocacy legislation and social change to make it unacceptable.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, and even today we still see remnants of those old ways of thinking.
Right.
Child trafficking, forced labor, it's all still out there.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that progress isn't a straight line, and we can't let our guard down.
And it makes you wonder, like, what are those deeply ingrained norms in Guyana?
Yeah.
How are they being addressed in these efforts?
Right. Like, I keep thinking back to Minister Prasad's comment about, differentiating household chores from exploitative child labor.
Yeah.
It seems like such a subtle but important distinction to make.
It is. It's delicate for sure.
Yeah.
You can't just impose like a Western standard on a society that has different values and traditions. It's about engaging with these communities, understanding their perspective, and finding solutions that respect local customs.
Yeah.
While still upholding those fundamental rights of children.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
It is. Combating child labor isn't about a one-size-fits-all solution.
Nope.
It's about tailoring interventions to each specific context.
Absolutely.
And that tailoring often involves this multifaceted approach. Providing economic opportunities for families so they don't need their child's income, improving access to education for those kids, and even challenging those long-held social norms that might be contributing to the problem.
Right. It's a whole package deal.
It's about going beyond laws and enforcement and actually creating an environment where children are valued and supported,
Yeah.
where they can truly thrive.
I love that.
Well, as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into child labor in Guyana, I'm feeling a mix of hope
Okay.
and a heavy dose of reality.
Yeah.
This is a complex issue, no doubt.
It is.
But it's clear that progress is being made.
I agree. And I think the key takeaway here is that we all have a part to play in ending child labor, whether it's educating ourselves, supporting organizations on the front lines, or pushing for policy changes.
Yeah.
Every action, big or small, contributes to a better future for children worldwide.
So true. Now, before we sign off for this part, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on.
Okay.
Considering what Guyana's doing, the wins and the struggles, what lessons can other countries facing similar battles learn from their approach?
That's a good question.
It's something to ponder as we continue this deep dive.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. As always, we'll pick this back up soon.
Awesome.
Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. Let's jump right back into Guyana's National Action Plan.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in all those little details, but I think it's important to remember what this plan actually represents.
Right.
It's their commitment, their promise to protect children and create a future where child labor is just simply unacceptable.
Yeah, and I'm curious, how does Guyana's plan stack up against what other countries are doing?
Okay.
Is this a unique approach, or are there like common threads running through these national strategies?
That's a good question. Well, think of it like this, the ILO.
Okay.
That's the International Labor Organization. They're like the global experts on this issue.
Okay.
And they've actually created a convention on the worst forms of child labor, which a lot of countries have signed on to or ratified.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a universal agreement to say no to the most harmful forms of child exploitation.
So it's like setting a global standard, a baseline for what's absolutely unacceptable.
Right, exactly.
But how does that actually translate into action on the ground?
Well, that's where those national action plans come in.
Okay.
They take those global principles and tailor them to each country's specific context.
Okay.
So they identify those unique challenges,
Right.
the specific forms of child labor that are prevalent in that country,
Okay.
and they outline targeted strategies to address them.
So it's like customizing a global blueprint to fit the local landscape.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So even though each country's plan is unique, there's this underlying framework, this shared commitment to ending child labor.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
within that framework, you see some common themes emerging.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, almost every plan prioritizes education.
Oh.
It's seen as like a fundamental right
Yeah.
and a really powerful tool to break the cycle of poverty and exploitation.
Makes sense. If children are in school and learning, they're less likely to be forced into labor.
Exactly. And education isn't just about academics, it's
Right.
about empowering children with skills and knowledge, critical thinking abilities that allow them to actually make informed choices and build a better future for themselves.
It's about giving them agency, a chance to write their own stories instead of having their lives dictated by circumstance.
That's a great way to put it, but let's face it, education alone can't solve this problem.
Right.
What about the families that are struggling to survive? How do these plans address the economic realities that often push children into labor in the first place?
It's a crucial point.
It is, and a lot of these plans include components that are focused on poverty reduction and economic empowerment.
Okay.
So, for example, they might promote microfinance initiatives
Okay.
to help families start small businesses.
Cool.
Or they might create vocational training programs for parents
Okay.
to improve their earning potential.
So it's about giving families viable alternatives.
Right.
A way to support themselves without having to rely on their children's income.
Exactly. And these economic interventions often go hand in hand with social protection measures.
Like what?
Things like cash transfer programs or subsidized health care
Got
to further alleviate those financial burdens on families.
It's like building a safety net, providing a cushion for those who are most vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. But what about those situations where children are already trapped in exploitative labor?
Right.
How do these plans address those immediate needs? It's a tough question.
It is. Well, that's where the focus shifts to protection and rehabilitation.
Okay.
Many plans establish mechanisms for identifying and rescuing children from those hazardous work environments.
Wow.
So they might set up hotlines
Okay.
for reporting child labor or create task forces to conduct inspections
Wow.
and raids on businesses that are suspected of employing children illegally.
So it's like a rapid response team intervening in those critical situations where kids are at immediate risk.
Precisely. And once those children are rescued,
Yeah.
the focus then turns to providing them with the support they need to heal and recover.
Right.
So this might include counseling, medical care,
Okay.
and educational opportunities to help them catch up on lost schooling.
It's a holistic approach addressing both the immediate needs
Yeah.
and the long-term well-being of these children.
Exactly. And crucially, these plans often emphasize the importance of legal frameworks and enforcement mechanisms.
Okay.
So they call for strengthening laws against child labor.
Improving labor inspection systems
Okay.
and holding those who exploit children accountable for their actions.
So it's about sending a clear message that child labor is a crime.
Right.
And those who perpetuate it will face consequences.
Absolutely. But, laws are only as good as their enforcement.
Right.
And what are some of the challenges that countries face when it comes to actually implementing these plans?
I imagine resources are a big one.
You're absolutely right. Resources are often a major hurdle.
Yeah.
A lot of countries, especially those in the developing world, simply lack the funding,
Right.
the infrastructure, and the trained personnel to effectively implement these plans.
It's like good intentions colliding with the harsh realities.
It is, but resources aren't the only challenge.
What else is there?
Well, corruption can be a major obstacle.
Yeah.
In some countries, officials might turn a blind eye to child labor in exchange for bribes,
Right.
allowing those exploitative practices to continue unchecked.
That's awful.
It is, and sometimes even cultural norms can create barriers to enforcement.
I'm thinking back to what we were talking about earlier about that line between household chores and child labor.
Yeah.
In some societies, it's deeply ingrained that children should contribute to family work.
You're right. It's a delicate balance.
It is.
Those deeply rooted beliefs can sometimes clash with efforts to eliminate child labor. And that can make it really challenging to gain community support and cooperation.
It's a reminder that addressing child labor isn't just about top-down policies.
Right.
It requires a bottom-up approach that actually engages communities, addresses their concerns, and respects those cultural values.
Exactly. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone. Solutions that protect children without undermining their families' livelihoods or disrupting their cultural fabric.
It's a complex web, for sure.
It is, but amidst all these challenges, what are some of the glimmers of hope?
Yeah.
What are some examples of countries that are making significant strides in combating child labor?
I'd love to hear about that.
Well, Brazil is often cited as a success story.
Aye.
They've managed to significantly reduce child labor rates over the past few decades.
Wow.
Through a combination of economic growth, social programs, and strong law enforcement.
So it's a reminder that progress is possible.
It is.
But what specific strategies have been particularly effective in Brazil's case?
Their Bolsa Familia program.
Okay.
It's a conditional cash transfer program that targets low-income families.
Okay.
And that's been instrumental in reducing child labor.
How so?
Well, it provides financial assistance to families
Okay.
on the condition that their children attend school regularly and receive proper health care.
Oh, wow. So it's like incentivizing families to invest in their children's future.
Yeah, exactly.
Providing a financial safety net that allows them to prioritize education over labor.
Right. And alongside those economic interventions, Brazil has also invested heavily in education, expanding access to schools, improving the quality of teaching, and providing vocational training opportunities for older children.
So it's a multi-pronged approach,
Yeah.
tackling the problem from all those different angles.
Exactly. But Brazil isn't the only country making strides.
Oh, good. Who else?
Thailand has also made significant progress in combating child labor,
Okay.
particularly in the fishing industry,
Okay.
which has historically been plagued by exploitation. They've implemented stricter regulations, improved monitoring and enforcement mechanisms, and partnered with NGOs to provide support and education to vulnerable families.
So it's encouraging to see concrete action being taken in industries that are notoriously difficult to regulate.
It is. But let's be honest, progress is often uneven.
Right.
And sadly, child labor rates have actually been rising in some parts of the world,
Oh, no.
particularly in conflict zones and areas that are experiencing economic hardship.
Yeah.
The pandemic, for example, has pushed millions of children into poverty,
Right.
which makes them more vulnerable to exploitation.
It's a stark reminder that progress isn't linear, and we can't afford to become complacent. We need to constantly adapt our strategies, address those emerging challenges,
Absolutely.
and ensure that every child is protected.
I think you're spot on, and one of the key lessons we can learn from successful programs is that there's no magic bullet.
Right.
It requires a holistic, collaborative approach that addresses those root causes of child labor, empowers families and communities, and creates a supportive environment where children can actually thrive.
It's a complex puzzle.
It is.
But we're starting to see those pieces come together.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up this segment of our deep dive, let's bring it back to Guyana.
Okay.
We've explored their national action plan.
Yeah.
We've analyzed global trends.
All right.
And looked at success stories from other countries. What specific aspects of Guyana's approach stand out to you?
Okay.
What are their strengths, and where might they face challenges?
Well, I'm particularly intrigued by their emphasis on community engagement
Okay.
and their focus on training officers to work collaboratively with families.
Yeah.
It suggests a recognition that top-down solutions just aren't enough.
Right.
And that lasting change requires a bottom-up approach that actually involves those who are most affected by the issue.
So it's a very human-centered approach,
It is.
focusing on understanding the nuances of each situation and working with families to find solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. And I think their collaborative approach,
Yeah.
bringing together multiple ministries with different perspectives and resources,
Yeah.
that holds a lot of potential by combining expertise in labor, social services, and education. They're creating a much more comprehensive strategy that addresses the multifaceted nature of this problem.
It's like they're weaving together these different strands of expertise to create a stronger, more resilient safety net.
Precisely. However, they'll likely face challenges when it comes to resources and enforcement.
Right.
Guyana is a developing country with limited financial means, and they'll need to be creative in maximizing the impact of their resources.
It's about doing more with less.
Right.
Finding innovative ways to stretch those resources further.
Exactly. And enforcement can be tricky.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with those deeply ingrained cultural norms and potentially limited capacity within their labor inspection system.
So they'll need to strike a delicate balance between enforcing those laws and respecting those cultural sensitivities while also making sure that they have the manpower and training to effectively monitor and address those child labor violations.
Absolutely. It's a tightrope walk.
It is, but with a clear plan, a strong commitment, and a willingness to adapt and learn from others. I'm hopeful that Guyana can make significant progress in protecting its children.
I share your optimism. Their dedication to this issue is evident. And their approach, while ambitious, really reflects a deep understanding of the complexities involved.
But we've covered a lot of ground in this segment.
We've
delved into the intricacies of national action plans, explored those global trends and success stories, and analyzed Guyana's unique approach. Now let's shift our focus to the individual level. What can we, as everyday people, do to contribute to this global effort to end child labor?
It can feel like an overwhelming problem.
It can.
But surely there are actions that we can take to make a difference.
Yeah. What can we do?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Okay.
We need to educate ourselves about this issue, understand its complexities, and recognize its presence in our own daily lives.
Because it's easy to feel disconnected from this issue.
It is.
Especially if we don't see child labor happening right in front of us.
But
it's often hidden in plain sight, embedded in the products we consume and the services we use.
Exactly. So we need to start asking questions, Where are our clothes made? Who picked our coffee beans? Are the companies that we're supporting taking steps to ensure that their supply chains are free from child labor?
So it's about becoming conscious consumers, making ethical choices that actually prioritize the well-being of children.
Exactly. But awareness isn't enough.
Right. What else can we do?
Well, we can support organizations that are working on the front lines to combat child labor. There are countless NGOs out there that are dedicated to rescuing children from exploitation, providing them with education and support, and empowering communities to break that cycle of poverty.
And even a small donation can make a big difference in the lives of these children.
It can, but it's not just about financial contributions. We can volunteer our time spread awareness through social media, advocate for stronger laws and policies that protect children from exploitation.
It's about using our voices, our platforms, and our resources to create a ripple effect of change.
Precisely. And those individual actions, when they're multiplied across communities and countries, they can create a powerful wave of change.
It's a reminder that we're not powerless in the face of this global challenge.
Right.
We all have a role to play.
We do.
In creating a world where every child is free to learn, play, and dream.
Yeah.
Without the burden of labor stealing their childhood.
Well said. Now let's delve into a specific aspect of child labor that often gets overlooked.
Okay.
Psychological impact on these children.
We've talked about the physical dangers, the economic consequences, but what about the emotional scars that child labor leaves behind?
It's a crucial aspect that we need to explore.
Yeah, what are the long-term consequences of denying a child their right to a carefree childhood?
Well, the psychological effects of child labor can be devastating and long-lasting. These children are often robbed of their innocence, exposed to harsh working conditions, and deprived of the opportunity to develop emotionally and socially.
It's like their childhood is being stolen from them.
It is.
Replaced with adult responsibilities and anxieties that they're just simply not equipped to handle.
Exactly. And that trauma can manifest in a lot of different ways.
How so?
Well, they might experience anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
Or develop behavioral problems.
That's a heavy burden to carry.
It is.
And it can impact their relationships, their education, their overall well-being throughout their lives.
And it's important to remember that the psychological effects of child labor, they can vary, depending on the type of work, the child's age, and their individual resilience. Some children might develop coping mechanisms that allow them to navigate these challenging circumstances, while others might really struggle to overcome that trauma.
And that highlights the importance of providing individualized support to these children.
Yeah.
Recognizing that their needs and their experiences are unique.
Absolutely. And that support might include counseling therapy or educational programs that are designed to address those specific challenges that they face.
So it's about creating a safe and nurturing environment where they can process their experiences, heal from the trauma, and reclaim their stolen childhood.
And it's about recognizing that the fight against child labor, it isn't just about economic empowerment or legal frameworks. It's about restoring dignity and hope to these children, helping them to rebuild their lives and reach their full potential.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just fighting for their physical freedom. We're fighting for their emotional well-being, for their right to a childhood filled with joy and laughter and the freedom to dream.
Well said. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's consider a thought-provoking question.
Hit me.
Given the complexities of child labor and the challenges of actually eradicating it, what role can technology play in this global effort?
Oh, that's interesting.
Could innovations in artificial intelligence, data analytics, or blockchain technology offer new tools to address this age-old problem?
That's a fascinating question to ponder.
It is.
Can we harness the power of technology to protect children and create a future where child labor is just relegated to the history books?
Yeah, I love that.
Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive,
where
we'll explore the potential of technology to contribute to this fight and leave you with some inspiring calls to action.
Until then, keep those minds churning.
All right, so welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive into child labor.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've talked about so much, from Guyana's efforts to these global trends, the impact on these kids, and even that potential role of technology.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It really is. But, before we get too bogged down in all that, I think it's important to remember that even amidst all these complexities, there are glimmers of hope.
Absolutely.
People are working tirelessly all over the world to combat child labor, and they're making a real difference.
Yeah, and in the last part, we were talking about how technology might play a role. And it really is like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the potential for things like AI and big data to help identify patterns of exploitation, maybe even predict where it's likely to happen.
Right.
But then there's the dark side, technology making it easier to hide these practices.
Yeah.
Or even creating new avenues for exploitation.
It's true. It's like technology reflects both the best and worst of humanity.
Right.
And for the sake of this conversation, let's focus on the potential for good.
Okay.
Like, imagine using satellite imagery and machine learning to identify remote areas where child labor might be occurring.
Yeah.
Like in agriculture or mining.
Or developing algorithms that can analyze supply chains.
Right.
And flag potential risks for child labor.
It's like giving investigators a superpower.
It is.
Allowing them to see through all the noise and pinpoint those areas where intervention is most needed.
And what about using blockchain technology to track the origins of products?
Oh, yeah. And ensure transparency in those supply chains.
That's a good idea.
Blockchain could help create a tamper-proof record of where goods come from.
Right.
Making it much harder for companies to hide unethical practices or mislead consumers.
You're like shining a light into those dark corners of global commerce.
Yeah.
Empowering consumers to make informed choices and hold companies accountable.
Absolutely. But, technology alone isn't a silver bullet.
Right.
We still need people working directly with communities and families to address those root causes of child labor.
Yeah. It's about combining the power of data and algorithms with the empathy, the cultural understanding, and those nuanced perspectives that really only human beings can bring to the table.
It's about using technology to amplify those human efforts, not replace them.
Totally. And it brings us back to Guyana and their focus on that community engagement.
Right.
Training officers to work directly with families. Understanding those individual circumstances of each child. It's a reminder that lasting solutions need to be grounded in the realities of those who are most affected by this issue.
Yeah.
It's about listening to their voices, understanding their needs, and working together to create a better future.
So where do we go from here? We've unpacked this complex issue.
We have
explored potential solutions, highlighted those glimmers of hope.
Yeah, what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
I think the most important takeaway is that we all have a role to play in this fight.
I agree.
Whether it's supporting organizations working on the front lines, making conscious consumer choices, or advocating for stronger policies.
Right.
Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a world where child labor is no longer tolerated.
It's about recognizing that this isn't someone else's problem. It's a shared responsibility.
Right.
And we all need to step up and do our part.
And remember, progress is possible.
Yeah.
We've seen countries make significant strides in reducing child labor. And with continued commitment, collaboration, and innovation, we can create a future where every child is free to live a life filled with opportunity and hope.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Imagine a world where child labor is a distant memory, a relic of the past.
Yeah.
What would that world look like?
What kind of society would we need to create to make that vision a reality?
It's a question worth exploring, a dream worth fighting for.
It is.
Until next time, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.